My mother said I was a failure at New Year's dinner. We only asked you here out of pity. Don't stay long. The next day, I walked out. 2 weeks later, the family cabin had disappeared and their accounts were shut down. I was 32, and Mom had invited me to a fancy restaurant for New Year's Eve. Everyone was dressed up, champagne flowing. You know the drill. I genuinely thought, maybe this year will be different. Then she leaned in, her voice almost sickeningly sweet, and whispered, "We only invited you out of pity. Don't stay too long, okay?" I froze. I thought I misheard her, but that little smirk on her face confirmed it. My brother, Ethan, burst out laughing, practically shouting, "She's basically the failure of the family, the one we always have to rescue and hide." A few other relatives chuckled. Someone even snickered. At least she showed up on time for once. It was like a collective agreement. I was the joke, the punchline of their New Year's celebration. Every single word hit me like a physical blow. But then, something inside me just clicked. An icy calm spread through my veins. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't even ask why they constantly used me as their favorite prop to feel superior. I just smiled, took a slow, deliberate sip of my drink, set the glass down, and quietly said, "I've got an early morning." No drama. No scene. I just walked out of that restaurant, alone, into the biting cold, their mocking laughter echoing behind me. They probably thought I was leaving because I was weak, because I couldn't handle it. They had no idea. They had no idea that night I didn't just hit my limit, I shattered it. And they certainly had no clue that 2 weeks later, their beloved family cabin would be gone. Their carefully managed bank accounts? Closed. Those lovely, plump statements they bragged about to tell a very different story. Stick around, because I'm going to tell you exactly how one terrible New Year's dinner turned into the week their entire financial world came crashing down. Fast forward 2 weeks. I'm chilling on my rickety old couch in my tiny Seattle apartment, just minding my own business. Suddenly, my phone absolutely explodes. First, 1 call from my mom. Then 2. Then 4, back to back, from her cell. I let every single one go to voicemail. A minute later, Ethan's name flashes across the screen. And then, the emails. Oh, the emails. From the bank, flooding my inbox. Urgent notice, account changes, statement available. My laptop was practically glowing. Finally, I picked up one of Mom's calls. All I heard was panicked, ragged breathing. Her voice was cracking, teetering on that hysterical edge she always hits when her precious image is threatened. "You did what, Megan?" she shrieked. "Do you know what's happening? The cabin. It's gone. Strangers are saying they own it. Your name's on the paperwork." She barely paused for breath before launching into the next crisis. "Our bank says some accounts are closed. The joint ones. You were on them. Auto payments bounced. Fees. Your dad is absolutely furious. What did you do to us?" In the background, I could hear my dad, George, barking orders and Mom yelling about fixing it. I didn't say a word. I just stared out at the gray Seattle sky, watching the rain slide down my window. Another call came in, Ethan. I hung up on Mom and just watched his name pulse on the screen. I didn't answer. Moments later, the angry text started. Paragraph after paragraph. "You ruined my credit. Do you have any idea what that does to my clients? You ruined my summer plans, family trips, everything. How could you be so selfish?" And then, the one that actually made me laugh out loud, all because you couldn't handle one harmless joke at dinner. I just closed my eyes, leaned back on the couch, and let out a long breath. 2 weeks earlier, walking out of that restaurant, it felt like someone had flipped a switch deep inside my chest. I went home to my little apartment. You know, mismatched thrift store furniture, chipped mugs, dropped my keys, and just stood there, listening to the silence. My hands were still shaking, but I fired up my laptop. I pulled up everything I'd ever signed for that family. Old bank emails, digital deeds, screenshots of Dad and Ethan telling me, "Just sign it, Megan, it's no big deal." Then, I pulled out this worn, slightly dusty folder from the back of my closet. It was crammed with paper copies of documents I'd barely understood, but always signed, because it was for the family. That night, for the first time, I actually read them. Really read them. And that Lake Willowbrook cabin they constantly bragged about? The one they told me was in my name just for tax reasons? Nope. It was in my name. Period. My signature, my ownership. And Ethan's family emergency credit line, the one he opened years ago after a deal fell through? I was listed as a co-applicant. The joint account Mom swore was just for building my credit? They'd been using it for lavish vacations, home upgrades, and their picture-perfect life. Page after page, it hit me, I wasn't the helpless failure they'd painted me as at dinner. I was their hidden financial safety net. I grabbed a pen, a blank notebook, and scrawled 3 words at the top. Get it back. Underneath, I started a list. 1. The cabin. 2. Every single joint account. 3. All the unavoidable loans and bills they'd tied to me. I didn't have all the answers, but one thing was crystal clear. I was done being used. My thoughts immediately went to the one person I trusted, the only one who could possibly navigate this mess. Tessa, my old college friend, who was now a sharp lawyer in the city. And as my phone buzzed again, Mom complaining about strangers in her cabin and Ethan blaming me for his bad credit, I looked down at that notebook on my coffee table. The first 3 items on my list? Neatly, firmly crossed out. They thought they could humiliate me, thought I'd just swallow it like always. 2 weeks later, they were finally staring down the consequences of their own signatures. The morning after that New Year's dinner, when the humiliation had settled into a cold, sharp ache, I called Tessa. We hadn't talked in months, but she picked up on the second ring, just like always. Her face popped up on my laptop, messy bun, oversized hoodie, the exact opposite of the polished people I'd just dined with. She smiled at first, said she'd meant to call. But then her smile just melted away when she saw my face. What happened, Mag? She asked, her voice instantly serious. So, I told her everything. The dinner, the whispers, the cruel jokes. How it wasn't the first time, but definitely the loudest. How every time Ethan's business stumbled, my name somehow ended up on another favor. Her expression shifted from worried friend to sharp, focused lawyer. I turned my camera around, showing her the stacks of deeds, loan statements, and joint account summaries covering my coffee table. All of them my name, neatly printed in places I barely remembered signing. Tessa switched gears in 2 seconds flat. Slow down, she said. Explain each one, line by line. I showed her the deed for the Lake Willowbrook cabin. My parents always said my name was on it because my grandparents wanted it to feel like mine too. Tessa actually cursed under her breath when she zoomed in on the scanned copy I'd emailed. Megan, she said, her voice tight, this isn't for tax reasons. This deed says you're the owner, not a co-owner. Owner. My stomach dropped. Then, the emergency credit line Ethan and my parents opened. I told her I never saw statements unless something went wrong, and how my questions were always brushed aside. She asked me to screen share my online banking dashboard. I clicked through the transactions, watching their life highlights unfold, flights, luxury hotels, expensive upgrades, holiday shopping sprees, all linked to my social security number. My chest tightened with every click. Tessa rubbed her forehead, leaning back in her chair. Okay, she finally said. Here's what we're not going to do. We're not going to blow up your life just to get even. We're going to follow the paper. We're going to do this clean. She explained that the cabin was legally mine. I could keep it, fix it up, rent it, or sell it. My call. The joint accounts were trickier, but still clear. I could close them or remove myself, especially if we could prove they were opened under pressure or without proper consent. I whispered, can I just shut down their financial safety net without telling them? Tessa nodded firmly. You owe no one your credit or your name, Megan. Not even family. If they wanted to play big finance games, they should have used their own signatures, not yours. She paused, biting her lip. There is one thing you could do, though. That would hit them where it hurts the most. But you need to be sure you want to go that far. She told me about a cash buyer, a tech couple who'd been eyeing a second home in that area for years. Someone who could move quickly, pay cleanly, an offer my parents would have bragged about for ages if it had been their deal. If you want out, Tessa said, I can call them. We can list the cabin quietly, prepare the paperwork, and close fast. If the deed says what I think it does, they have very few legal options. I chewed my cheek, remembering summers at that cabin with my grandparents. They were the only ones who ever made me feel like I wasn't a disappointment. I pictured my parents, posing for perfect family photos there, posting them online, as if I was just too busy to join their wonderful life. Selling it meant severing my last warm memory of them. But leaving it with them felt even worse. Tessa, I asked quietly, what would happen to all the other stuff if we did it your way? She laid it out like a simple recipe. First, we prep the cabin sale and set a closing date. Then, we contact the banks, close all joint accounts, and remove you from anything you shouldn't have been tied to. And then, we document everything. Every call, every email. If they come after you, we'll show exactly how they've used your name and credit for years. My notebook, which had been blank hours before, was now full of lines, arrows, and bullet points. 3 times, I'd circled the cabin. I looked back at the screen at Tessa. I don't want to destroy them, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I just want them gone. Tessa looked directly at me. Sometimes, Megan, the only way people like that stop is when the consequences finally land on their own doorstep. You're not stealing from them. You're taking your own name back. I sat with that for a long moment, the silence stretching between us. Finally, I nodded. Call your buyers, I said. Let's see how fast they can move. Tessa, true to her word, wasted no time. The very next morning, she texted me, a short message that made my stomach flip. They're keen. Can we meet this afternoon? 2 hours later, I was in a quiet corner of her office, a folder heavy in my lap, while she showed photos of the Lake Glenwood cabin to a couple in their mid-30s on her laptop. My parents would have adored these buyers, so polished, so excited, talking about summers on the lake, maybe even renting it as a creative retreat for tech workers. A part of me, a tiny, nostalgic part, wanted to slam the laptop shut and scream that this place was too tangled in my life to give up. But every time that instinct rose, I heard Mom's voice at dinner, the word pity curling like smoke in my ear, and Ethan's cruel laugh calling me a failure. So, I just listened. Tessa had everything perfectly organized. The property is hers, she told them, gesturing to me, with current taxes paid and no liens. The buyers had financing, cash, and were ready to move fast. When Tessa quoted a price, their eyes lit up with that "this is a great deal" look. Within an hour, we were drafting an offer. Tessa translated all the legalese into plain English as we went through each page. Here, she said, tapping a paragraph, is where you acknowledge you are the sole owner. Then, here's where you agree to transfer the title. If you sign, this is no longer theirs to control, Megan. This is your decision, your sale. My hand shook as I picked up the pen, but I signed. By the time I left her office, the cabin that had symbolized my generous family for years was now going to someone who didn't even know my parents' names. That afternoon, I went home and opened my laptop, starting on the second list, joint accounts. The family credit card, the one used for beach vacations and fancy restaurant bills I'd never even seen, was the easiest target. I called the bank, gave my info, and asked to close it. The customer service rep was polite until she pulled up my account. Her voice changed. "Oh," she said, "you're the primary holder." Wait, what? I'd always been told my name was on it to build credit. No one ever mentioned my parents and Ethan were just authorized users on my account. The moment that clicked, the conversation shifted. I calmly told her I wanted the card closed. She warned me about the balance, how to pay it off, how authorized users would be notified. I listened, agreed where necessary, but repeated, I understood, and I wanted it closed. Next was Ethan's emergency line of credit, the one he'd spun to me as a short-term solution. Tessa's suspicions were confirmed by the banker. I was a co-applicant, fully responsible. Ethan had been using it like a revolving door. Again, I wasn't loud. I didn't cry. I simply asked for my name to be removed and the account frozen, pending a bank review of the risk without my involvement. They pushed back, but when I calmly mentioned Tessa's key phrases, consent and misuse, they caved. I worked my way through the list, utility bills for the cabin under my SSN, a backup checking account my parents opened with my name, and their money to float expenses. Each time a rep told me my name was on something I barely remembered signing, it felt like a slap. Every time I closed an account or removed myself, it was like escaping a suffocating net I hadn't even realized I was caught in. I meticulously followed Tessa's advice, documenting everything: call logs, confirmation emails, screenshots of account changes. At first, it felt like I was building a case against my family. But then it shifted. It became proof, undeniable proof, that I wasn't crazy, that I hadn't imagined how they'd quietly, systematically, wired their entire financial security to my identity. I leaned back from my laptop as the sun dipped into a gray Seattle evening, my notebook open beside me. The first 3 items were now heavily crossed out: cabin sold, pending closing, joint credit card closed, emergency line with Ethan frozen, under review. In some parallel universe, I knew they were probably sitting in their comfortable home, telling themselves I was just being dramatic, that I'd never actually do anything. In this one, their favorite getaway was already changing hands, and their invisible safety nets were being systematically yanked out from under them. I stared at the scribbled words on the page, then at the stack of documents on my table. For the first time in a long, long while, I felt completely in control. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't snapped. All I'd done was sign my name and say one simple word they weren't used to hearing from me: no. Now, closing those accounts and signing the cabin away? You'd think that would be enough. But with my family, nothing, and I mean nothing, was ever that simple. Tessa kept hammering the same thing home with every update I texted her: protect yourself, Megan. Paper trail. And she was right. My parents had a nasty habit of using family loyalty as a shield, pretending we were just business whenever it suited them. I needed something more official than phone calls and screenshots for this to stick. I had to step into their world, the one they trusted most: lawyers and paperwork. So, several days after I'd systematically untangled my name from everything, I called the one person my parents trusted almost as much as themselves: Richard Hayes. He'd been drawing up their wills and estate plans for years. Growing up, I saw his name on envelopes on the kitchen counter, heard my dad brag that Richard was the best and would make sure everything was clean when we were gone. I always thought that included me warmly. Now, I wondered if it meant something else entirely. When I called his office and gave my name, the receptionist actually paused, her tone shifting when she realized I wasn't calling for my parents. After holding me for a moment, she said Mr. Hayes had a gap later that week. I could come in. The day of the meeting, I walked into a downtown office that felt exactly like my parents' living room. Dark wood, framed certificates, sophisticated art that probably cost more than my car. Richard was older than I remembered, thinner hair, heavier glasses, but his handshake was still firm. "Megan," he said, a little surprised, "your mother didn't mention you were coming by." I just smiled. "That was the point," I replied. I sat down and did exactly what I'd done with Tessa. I laid out the whole story. The cabin, the accounts, how my name had been used. I didn't even mention the dinner. I just stuck to the cold, hard facts, pushing a tidy folder across his shiny desk. He made those little throat-clearing noises, tapping the pages with a pen, just like older lawyers do. Then he pulled out my grandparents' will. The original one, the one that gave the Lake Willowbrook property to Megan for her future. On paper, it was so simple. My parents had treated it like their own, and I was just lucky to be invited. Richard frowned, comparing that document to my parents' newer estate plans. Somewhere along the line, my name had quietly been changed. Not removed, but folded in with other assets, making what was unequivocally mine look like theirs. He didn't say fraud, but his jaw tightened, and I knew he was thinking it. He asked about the joint accounts. I showed him where I'd started closing things, how the bank had confirmed I was primary on some of them. I watched the moment it clicked for him. If anyone looked too closely, he could be the one caught between my parents and a very awkward conversation with a regulator. "Megan," he finally said, his voice measured, "I've been advising your parents for a long time." I've always encouraged them to keep things clear and fair. It seems their implementation hasn't been as transparent as I would have hoped. Lawyer talk 4. They got cute and dragged your name into places it never belonged. I asked him bluntly, what does that mean for me? I was surprised by his blunt response. It means, he said, we fix it. We record what your grandparents intended and what has actually happened with your name and credit. And it also means that if anyone ever comes asking, there's proof that I advised them to fix it. The next 30 minutes were spent going over Richard's updates, adjustments to the estate plan reflecting the cabin's value as mine, even though I was selling it, language clarifying my parents and brother were responsible for the credit line debts. Yes, he was protecting himself, but for the first time, it felt like he might actually be protecting me. When I left his office, it felt like I'd just moved a major piece on the chessboard. My family loved allies like Richard. His position now was neutral at best, and at worst, he was a witness against them. On the bus ride home, the city lights blurring through the rainy glass, I opened my phone and stared at a blank Facebook status box. For years, my parents had been masters of PR on social media, cabin holiday photos, Ethan clinking glasses at rooftop bars, mom selfies with captions about blessings and gratitude. I was always cut out of the frame in real life, and a public call-out wasn't my style. But I wasn't about to help them maintain that illusion anymore. I typed a few basic lines. You grow up thinking certain things are family gifts until you realize your name and credit are being used as a safety net without you knowing the risk. I finally read the fine print this year, taking back what was legally mine. I won't ever sign anything I don't understand again. I pressed post. No names. No drama. Just truth. In a tone calm enough that anyone outside the situation would see it as a vague, reflective thought. Within minutes, the comments started flooding in, old friends, college classmates, people who knew me and my parents through their carefully curated lives. Proud of you for setting boundaries. This hits too close to home. Did something happen? Are you okay? Then came the reactions I expected, public sympathy from mom's church friends. You're so brave for speaking up, sweetie. Family can be complicated. Praying for you. The kind of public validation my parents couldn't afford to lose. My mom texted me within 10 minutes. What does that post mean? Take it down now. You're monsterizing us. A few minutes later, Ethan, delete it. Posts are visible to clients. Do you realize how bad this looks on US? I just stared at their frantic messages, seeing how utterly focused they were. Not on what they'd done, but on how it looked. For the first time in my life, I did absolutely nothing. I left the post up. I didn't reply. I just let it sit there. A small, quiet flag in the middle of my feed. They'd used my name privately for years to prop themselves up. All I did was start using my voice to reclaim it. You'd think I'd set their house on fire by their reaction. And actually, I hadn't even really started yet. 3 days after I hit post, Ethan literally pounded on my apartment door like he was trying to break it down. I just settled down with a cup of coffee and my laptop when the banging started, followed by him yelling my name down the hallway. I opened the door, blocking most of the view, but his eyes immediately scanned my thrift store furniture and game notes on the table, that familiar judgmental twitch in his face. You think this is funny? He snapped, waving his phone at me. You've completely nuked my credit. A client pulled out of a deal this morning because they saw unusual activity. What the hell did you do? I stayed calm. I stopped using accounts that should never have had my name on them, I said. I froze a line of credit I'd been duped into co-signing. I closed a primary card that was opened without my full consent. He scoffed, like I was being ridiculous. You're overreacting, Megan. That stuff was under control. Dad had it managed. We were using it strategically. That's what families do. I reminded him of the time he'd called me crying at 2:30 a.m., begging me to sign one thing to keep him from losing everything. I reminded him of the vacations, the fancy dinners, the upgrades, all paid for by accounts tied to my social security number, while I was eating ramen in this very apartment. He didn't deny it. He just rolled his eyes. It all comes out in the wash, he said, dismissively. You benefited too. You got to come to the cabin, didn't you? That was the moment. That was the moment something inside me snapped. I stepped back, opened the door wider, and swept my hand across my tiny living room. Do you see a cabin here, Ethan? Do you see a savings account fattened up by your investments? Do you see any of the benefits you're so sure I enjoyed? All I see are bills with my name on them and a family that thought I'd never actually read them. He shot back that I was ruining everything, that Mom hadn't stopped crying, that Dad was furious, that this would haunt him for years. You're going to cost me my career, he said, his voice rising, all because you couldn't take a joke and a couple of signatures. It wasn't a joke when you called me a failure in front of everyone, I said, my voice steady. And they weren't just a couple of signatures. They were my life. He looked guilty for a second, then shoved it down. Fine, he growled. You want to play it this way? I'm bringing Dad. He'll explain. He left without waiting for an answer. An hour later, there was another knock. Quieter, but somehow heavier. When I opened the door, my dad stood there in a perfectly pressed shirt, his calm, unshakable mask firmly in place, like he was negotiating with a difficult client. He didn't ask to come in. He just walked past me, straight to the only decent armchair, and sat down as if he owned the place. I stayed standing. Megan, he began, his voice measured, like he was talking to an adult. You've made some impulsive decisions. You're affecting more than just yourself. I'm perfectly happy to talk like adults, I replied. Adults read what they sign. Adults don't hide debts in their kids' names. Adults don't tell their daughter a house is for her future and then act shocked when she treats it like it actually is. His jaw tightened. The cabin was a family asset, he said, unwavering. We managed it for you. You had no idea how to handle something like that financially. We stepped in to protect you. No, I said, my voice cutting through his calm. You stepped in to use it. I slid the folder Tessa and Richard had prepared off the table and laid out the deed, the credit line statements, Richard's notes on the estate plan. I pointed to my grandparents' will, highlighting the line that gave me the property. I showed him where my name was plastered on unrelated loans and accounts. For the first time since he walked in, he wasn't quick to respond. When he saw Richard's letterhead, he scanned the pages faster. A flush crept up his face as he realized Richard had not only agreed to correct the paperwork, but to clarify who was responsible for what. You went to Richard, he said slowly, almost a question. I just shrugged. Without us, he continued, putting the papers down and pinching the bridge of his nose. All right, he said, his voice dropping, maybe we blurred a few lines over the years. But you're making a spectacle out of this. That post you made, the calls we're getting, the questions. Do you have any idea how hard I've worked to build our reputation? I looked him dead in the eye. That reputation is yours to worry about, Dad. I only care about my name, my credit, and my future. Next, he tried a softer angle. We're your parents, Megan. Family shares risk. We helped you when you needed it. We covered things. We loaned you money. I asked him pointedly if he had any documentation of those loans to me, anything that looked even remotely like the meticulous paperwork I had attached to every single favor I had done for them. He stayed silent. He sighed, leaned back, probably thinking he had his trump card. What do you want? He asked. Money? An apology? You want us to sign something? Just tell me what makes this go away and we can talk. I took a deep breath. It was in that moment I realized how fundamentally different we were. He genuinely thought everything had a price. I didn't want hush money. I didn't want a backdoor settlement or some empty promise. I wanted the accounts fixed, which was happening. I wanted the estate plan Richard was creating to reflect reality. I wanted them to stop treating me like a burden, a backup plan. I wanted out of family finances. He just stared at me like I was speaking another language. You can't just opt out of family, Megan, he said. You already did, I replied. The apartment was quiet then, just the hum of my fridge. His phone buzzed. He glanced down, and I saw Mom's name and text preview pop up. The buyers are already moving into our cabin. People are asking questions. Please fix this. He stood up abruptly. You made a big mistake, he said, his voice tight. We'll see what our options are. I just told him that was fine, and that Richard and Tessa had copies of every email, document, and screenshot. I watched, for the first time, my father notice the distinct shift in power. It felt worse that he left without slamming the door. That night, Mom called 3 times, leaving 3 distinct voicemails. The first was pure fury, accusing me of betrayal. The second, she was crying, heartbroken about how their summer traditions were ruined, how the cabin had been the family heart. In the third, her voice was small, raw, a sound I'd never heard from her before. She whispered that people from church were sending her my social media post, that she didn't know what to say, and maybe they had gone too far. After listening, I gently placed the phone face down on the table. For years, their feelings were the weather in our house, controlling what everyone else could feel, could do. But now, they were sitting in the storm, not me. Beneath all their anger, panic, threats, and guilt trips, there was one simple truth they were finally forced to face. Without my name quietly supporting their perfect life, they had to stand alone. Consequences, I realized, don't hit like a movie explosion. They creep in through unexpected emails, revised paperwork, and awkward conversations in your parents' longtime lawyer's office. A week after Dad left my apartment, Richard called. His voice was slow, deliberate, but I detected a hint of approval. He told me he'd met with my parents to explain the changes. The estate plan was updated to reflect what my grandparents had actually written years ago, not the convenient version my parents had twisted it into. The cabin, now sold, was clearly valued as something I had received and controlled, not a family asset they could leverage whenever they felt generous. The credit lines were annotated, making it crystal clear who they belonged to. If anyone ever asked, there would be a solid paper trail showing I had asked for clarity, and Richard had encouraged it. Translation: if my parents tried to drag him into a legal mess, they'd be dragging him in too, and he wasn't about to let that happen. That piece of the puzzle, knowing he was aligned with the truth, allowed me to finally breathe a full, deep breath. When the cabin money hit my account, I didn't go on a revenge shopping spree. I paid off my last legitimate debt. Tessa, looking me straight in the eye, said, "I love you, but the IRS will not care about your family drama." Instead, I did something for myself. I rented a small but bright studio space near my apartment. I needed a place with big windows and scuffed hardwood floors where I could spread out my game ideas without balancing them on my kitchen table. When I first unlocked that door and walked into my room, not ours, not the family's, I felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't even realized was tight. I hung a few framed game sketches, set my laptop on a used desk, and sent Tessa a picture. She replied with 3 words, "Just in time, Megan." Things were definitely different on my parents' side of town. Ethan, for instance, eventually had to sell his fancy condo and move into a townhouse. Some of his clients stayed, sure, but others quietly switched to advisors without unusual activity on their reports. Mom still posted on Facebook and Instagram, but her tone had subtly shifted. She became more careful with her bragging, realizing people were actually reading between the lines now. A few weeks later, one afternoon, she messaged me, asking to meet somewhere neutral, just us. I accepted, but with clear terms. No money talk, no guilt trips, no pretending nothing had happened. We met at a coffee shop. She looked smaller, somehow, without the protective bubble of their house around her. For a solid minute, we just sat there, stirring our drinks, silently recalling all the things we'd never said. Then, to my surprise, she did it. She apologized. Not the "I'm sorry if you felt that way" half apology I'd grown up with, but a real, genuine one. She apologized for laughing at me at dinner. She admitted it wasn't pity, but control. She regretted signing my name without truly considering the cost. She'd spent years, she said, convincing herself they were helping me, that it was for my own good, because that let her ignore how completely they were using me. I listened. I didn't rush to comfort her. I just thanked her for the apology, but told her that words alone wouldn't change anything. I told her I wasn't removing them from my life, just the version of me they knew. The peacekeeper who signed whatever was presented? She was gone. No more joint accounts. No more favors that looked an awful lot like a family emergency line of credit. No more using my work or my life to make themselves feel better. Our relationship, I explained, would now have to be on terms that didn't shrink me. And for once, her eyes shiny, she just nodded. She didn't argue. Dad took longer. He never once said, "I'm sorry." Not exactly. But he did stop trying to convince me I was overreacting. When we finally talked, months later, he admitted he'd assumed I wouldn't push back. He honestly didn't think I'd notice the setup because he always believed I didn't care about money. I explained that not caring about money and being lied to are two very different things. My family isn't warm and hugging anymore. There are strange pauses in conversations and a distinct gap between their world and mine. But you know what? We also have something new, boundaries. They stand with their choices. And I stand firmly with mine. If this story sounds familiar to you, there's one crucial thing I wish someone had told me years ago. Family can love and support you, but they do not have unlimited rights to your time, your energy, or your signature. Being related does not, I repeat, does not obligate you to hand over your credit score, your savings, or your silence. Reading the fine print, asking uncomfortable questions, and learning to say no when everyone expects you to say yes can be the most self-loving thing you will ever do. You are not ungrateful for protecting yourself. In fact, it makes you accountable to the most important person, you. This isn't legal advice, so always consult a lawyer or financial counselor before making big decisions. But let this be a reminder that you are not a safety net or a punchline. You can grow out of the role your family put you in. You can reclaim your name. If you've ever had to choose between your peace and your self-respect, tell me in the comments below, what did you do? Or what would you do? I really want to hear your thoughts.